Welcome to Greenplum Summit 2020, the Reimagined Customer Conference. My name is Jacques Eistock, and my first guest is Robert Scott. Robert is here from one of our great Greenplum partners, Eon Collective. For most organizations, the journey to data warehouse modernization begins with migrating away from legacy, proprietary, and expensive alternatives. Eon and Robert have been working with us on quite a number of engagements, migrating to Greenplum, and because of that, they've been able to accelerate and automate the migration process with a technology that they've created called ADEPT. So Robert, please tell us more.
Thank you, Jacques. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about what that ADEPT is and the methodology and the process that we actually use to actually migrate from other legacy or other databases and so forth over to Greenplum. We kind of call it from anything to anywhere. And if we go to the next slide, we kind of go through just talk a little bit about what our background and so forth is. And today we're actually going to go through a demonstration of an actual way that we do our assessment and migration as well. As you see here, I'm Robert Scott. I have some experience across many different industries that are out there, from the higher ed community to financial services and quick serve as well. But really today is not really to talk about me, but it's really to talk about how we leverage VMware Greenplum in our projects in data modernization. Next slide, please. As part of our assessment process, our company, Eon, has different offerings that are wrapped around the methodology ADEPT that Jacques had mentioned earlier. We have assessment services, which we're going to talk about the utility that we use, which is ADEPT for that. We have migration. We'll go a little bit into what that is as well, of how we utilize the assessment process and migrate. And then ultimately, especially which is large in data modernization efforts and so forth today, is automation services, and how do we automate that process along outside of the assessment as well. Next slide, please. So everybody talks about being agile, and what is agile in the world today? Well, really, agility comes with a couple other things. It's an acceleration. How do we accelerate over things that we have done before? How do we take manual processes that we've done before, do them in a more agile way so we can have a better time to market, get things into our consumers' hands and our customers' hands a lot quicker. And these are the solution accelerators that we talk about. ADEPT allows us for, as a methodology, it utilizes a metadata-driven framework, and we use design patterns and reusable artifacts and so forth to be able to do that migration. And we utilize industry veteran approved methods and so forth, from those like Dan Linstead, Kimball, Inman, and so forth, to actually do embed it into our methodology as well. Next slide. Now, our claim to fame and Eon's claim to fame really, as it relates to ADEPT, is process intelligence and process improvement. And process intelligence for us is really the ability to read the logs and read the information about your systems and reverse engineer the process. Instead of telling us what the process is, what we like to do is reverse and tell you what the process is based on system information that is there. So what we're going to show today is a utility that reads the metadata of your systems and kind of stitches together what we need what we have to actually do our assessment. Next slide, please. So what we're going to talk about is a combination of business process, process intelligence, what you guys are familiar with, which is business intelligence, and infrastructure, along with how we integrate that within the VMware Tanzu experience. Next slide, please. But what we're going to do, instead of doing all this talking, slides and so forth, we're actually going to show you a presentation demonstration of what ADEPT and so forth looks like. Can you start that, please? Here's a little demonstration of our ADEPT Asset Manager. It's the tool that we use to take a look at the complexities around migrating from a database such as Oracle or Netezza, SQL Server, or what have you, to Greenplum. And we utilize ADEPT not only for migrations of databases, but we utilize it for doing our assessments for migrating from on-prem to the cloud, from report environment. We utilize it in mergers and acquisitions, M&As, when we're looking at different processes and migrating ERP systems and what have you. ADEPT stands for an agile design environment for process transformations, any type of process that needs to be transformed from one thing to another. It utilizes a metastore, a metadata repository that's underneath that allows us to store the relationships of the assets that we're actually assessing. I'm just going to connect in. So as you can see here, what we're actually looking at is we have a tool, and we utilize that information to kind of stitch this picture together that tells us not only what are the tables and so forth that need to be moved, but a lot of times companies forget about all the interrelationships that need to be reconfigured if we moved off of that system to another system, and all of the ETL that may be going against those tables and so forth that need to be either reconfigured, changed, or migrated to another ETL tool itself. In this case, we're looking at Informatica when we actually reverse engineer the information that we found out of the logs and so forth. We found that there were applications, and Informatica ETL tool was being used to actually do its data integration as well. So when we stitch this together, we see, hey, we have Informatica job. It has components. It has queries that are a part of those components. That has tables that need to be converted to Greenplum, that are included in reports that are being analyzed by a person. And then we also built in the capability to assess the complexity of migrating these things and so forth as well. Now, once we have that information, we actually, I'm going to load this information up, load our demo. So I'm going to start in here by taking a look at information about one of our persons. And if I import that information in, you see that this Miss Vicki Swanson actually has been impacted by a report that needs to change because of the migration that we're actually going through. Wow, all right, so this is a MicroStrategy report called High Volume Branches that she's analyzed within, let's say, the last year. And we have a relationship for this particular report. And if we click on that, we say, oh, by the way, it's an Netezza table that actually needs to be migrated. And the Netezza table needs to be migrated to Greenplum. So what we've identified already is what the impact is of Vicki, the reports that need to be changed, the tables and the type of database that needs to change, the migration tool that we're actually going to. In this case, the asset that we're going to is a VMware Tanzu Greenplum. Here's some column information about that table. And we also have here a rating engine, as I mentioned before. And if we look at that rating engine and we click on the rating, we can see that we have identified this through our recommendation engine in our rating engine, that it has a 12 rate basis. That's how we rank them. And that it's a complex conversion to migrate this table from Netezza to Greenplum. And the reasons is that we not only take a look at what needs to be migrated, the number of columns that need to be migrated and so forth, but we also look at the relationships of things that need to be migrated. We actually found here that we not only need to migrate a report, but we need there's a query that's associated that needs to be rewritten. Not only that, if we double click on here, we can see that was a query that was impacted by a lookup procedure. Where's that lookup procedure coming from? We double click on here, we can see that this lookup procedure is really an Informatica job. And that Informatica job has this lookup procedure that has this query that's utilizing this table that needs to be migrated over to Greenplum, that actually is being used in the report that needs to be repointed to Greenplum that's being used by Vicki Swanson, who needs to be aware of these changes so she can test that we did our migration successfully. Well, what other information that we have with the ADEPT engine is that we can do that across all the components that we found within an ETL tool, whether that be Informatica or a Talent or Data Stage or Ab Initio or what have you. We read that metadata and we used a cataloging technique to kind of stitch this information together. And then once we have that information, as you can see, we can actually see the query as we had before, but we also identify some aspects of the query. You see here that we know that this was a Netezza style query. We're going to be converting that over to Greenplum. And on top of that, that Greenplum is a dialect of Postgres SQL that's there. So any assessor, architect, or manager or so forth that's looking at this, they don't have to be overly technical. They can actually see from a bird's eye view what needs to be migrated and ultimately get an understanding of what it's going to take from a complexity perspective of migrating those as well. One of the other things that we have is the ability to get into the nuts and bolts, or what is it going to take to actually migrate the SQL that we're finding, the tables and so forth, over to Greenplum. One is to take a look at it from the aspect of the data that needs to be moved. And as a matter of fact, we got a very strong methodology, as I've already been talking about this in our presentation, about the methodology that goes along with the utility that we use to actually do the migration. But you will see in here that we have the ability to convert the ETL maybe natively. Maybe we don't just want to repoint the Informatica mapping over to Greenplum. Maybe we want to go straight 100% ELT, SQL based, and we want to use Greenplum store procedures and change the SQL and so forth out itself. And can this actually be migrated as well? Take the Informatica and migrate it to straight up PG SQL or Greenplum SQL underneath the hood. Well, we can do that as well. And the way we go about doing this is that we right mouse click on the Informatica job itself, and we have this ADEPT SQL flow. And what that is going to do is going to look at the combination of all of this Informatica mapping, the SQL and so forth, and come up with a way to actually drill down into the details of what needs to be moved there. So if I click on this, you'll see it will convert the Informatica mapping to pushdown SQL, and we click OK. And what that did was generate some SQL that we can import into our SQL Flow utility to look at what it's going to what it takes to migrate that over to Greenplum SQL as well. So at that point in time, we go into our flow analysis, which is our SQL flow, and we'll open this up. And then, as you can see, it can bring in the SQL that needs to be migrated as well. And what I'm going to do here is that I know that the SQL that we created got dumped into our clipboard. So I'm just going to take that SQL, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to paste that SQL in and I'm going to visualize it. And voila, once we have what you can see we have here is we have the actual SQL of the Informatica mapping pushed into pure SQL that's here, that we then go through and convert to Greenplum SQL or Postgres SQL or what have you. Now, what you can see here is that if we, for those that know Informatica and so forth, we can see that we actually name the components as the components that you actually see in Informatica itself. So you see here, here's a source qualifier for the BOS account info stage. If we go back to that knowledge graph, you will see here that there was a source qualifier. And what was the name of that source qualifier? SQBOS account info stage. So if we go back over here into the flow analysis, you will see we have that as well. 100% SQL, take the ETL and convert that to SQL as well. So there's a couple different, once again, a couple different ways of doing the migration. Repointing the Informatica mapping from pointing to a Netezza table to pointing to a Greenplum table, or doing away with Informatica in this case and going 100% SQL based and so forth. So we have the ability to utilize a utility and utilize automation and so forth to be able to do that particular migration. So all in all, you know, we utilize a combination of our ADEPT utility with our SQL flow analysis, with our meta schema of all those things that need to be migrated. So at a high level, you can say, oh, we got an Informatica job that's touched. We have queries that are touched, Greenplum tables, tables that need to be converted to Greenplum. We have reporting and so forth, which is kind of the schema analysis. And then along with that, we have the knowledge graph here as well. This is a living and breathing tool. All of this is done because we have metadata that helps us support that and build upon as well. I hope you like what you saw here, and we'll go back to the presentation and take care.
That was a great presentation, Robert.
Thank you. So in closing, that's it. We just want to thank you for the time that you have given through here. If you just go to the next slide, and we can actually close off this this particular session. You have just seen our assessment called ADEPT, Agile Design Environment for Process Transformations. We take your data model, your DDL, your ETL jobs, your reports, and all of that, and we bring that in to actually show that end to end. If you go to the next slide, please. And we migrate that information from your on-premise environment to either another on-premise environment via VMware Tanzu, or we can take that to the cloud. And all of this can be done, as you can see, through the migration to Greenplum itself as well. And then the next slide, please. All in all, we've utilized this type of a process in migrating thousands of databases that need to go over to Greenplum, or it can be a small number of databases. The methodology is the same. The utility that we use is what you have seen there to be able to harvest the information into our environment and actually utilize it to do the migrations. I want to thank you for the time that you have given today. And if you go to the next slide, we look forward to having you guys come take a look at our methodology, look how we do our capabilities and our planning, and see how it can actually be utilized with more with the other presentations and so forth that will be done today as well. I'm sure you enjoy. Next slide, please. All in all, we just want to say thank you from Eon Collective, and we want to say thank you to VMware and the Greenplum team for giving us this opportunity to discuss our process and our technology and our company. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. And getting visual insight into what workloads are being run and from where, and then being able to understand what, if anything, needs to change, certainly makes the process of modernization easier. So very much appreciate the partnership.